history, I like to use an analogy. Think of your dog's brains like computer desktops, and they have folders corresponding to scenarios that they run into often. When they run into a familiar situation, they go to that folder that shows all of their history of that particular scenario. Then dogs will calculate, based off their history, what is the most rewarding behavior to perform in this scenario. Do I want to come back and get a treat, or do I want to keep exploring and find a tennis ball or good smells? So we want to establish folders that are full of files of our desired responses. As those files accumulate, dogs develop a history for choosing the most reinforcing behaviors in those given scenarios. So those folders are filled up with files. So let's check out this folder for meeting people. So say your dog's a little bit nervous of meeting people, and then somebody meets them like this. They encroach their space, they crowd their space, they have their dog have that dog has a bad experience with that scenario. So instead of having your dog have that bad experience, this would be an example of a more structured, easier experience for them to have, of meeting a person, getting a treat, and having it be a controlled interaction, rather than just willy-nilly having people run up to your dog and saying hi to them. It's not just about obtaining a reward, it's also about maybe avoiding discomfort. So say if a dog that is nervous of people experiences that first scenario, of somebody crowding their space, and then runs away and gets away from that scenario. The next time they meet a person that they might be uncomfortable with, they're like, okay, the last time I felt this way, I ran away, and that's the most reinforcing behavior for me right now. A muddled reward history will have a dog that runs into a scenario and will start calculating, how should I act in this given scenario? So a strong reward history is full of files that all say the same thing. Therefore, the dog doesn't have to calculate what is the most reinforcing behavior in that scenario. Through training, we can establish a strong reward history for desired behaviors through things like errorless learning. So for example, if I'm teaching recall, I might teach it on leash to start with, so they can't make any errors, right? And then we can also do, like we discussed a lot here, incrementally increasing criteria. So low expectations, and then as they get better, we give them some more responsibilities, as opposed to starting off really difficult. That way we can create a strong reward history instead of dogs that have rehearsed the wrong behaviors a few times. After they rehearse those wrong behaviors, then you get a dog that starts calculating, do I really want to listen to what you actually told me? Reward history, just think of it as the past accumulation of experiences inform him what to do on this next scenario. If I've structured his recall to where I did 1,000 recalls with him on leash and I gave him treats every single time, I built a really strong reward history for recall before I started giving him the option to pick and choose to do it or not. Versus if first day I take him out to a field, I cut him off leash and I tell him to come, I might build the exact wrong reward history. As in, come means pick and choose if I want to come. Does that make sense? So usually we teach things with low distractions, and the dog has an inability of blowing us off because we have a controlled environment. And then I can start doing it with less and less guardrails for him to make the wrong decision. Does that make sense? So when we're training, it's very controlled environments. And then we eventually get to the part where we're doing it around competing reinforcers or distractions. Those files that I spoke of earlier are full of pictures, which are basically snapshots of visual or auditory cues. Sit. So pictures, they're like snapshots that cues them into a behavior. Very basic teaching sit, on leash, verbal command, I have something of value that they want. No competing stimuli, on leash, I'm standing right in front of them. They're taking that all in as one snapshot, one picture, right? And a lot of times dogs learn the picture for sit is I have something that they want. So they're not really even taking in all the other visual cues. They just see that one piece of that one cue, and they're really engaged with that cue rather than all of these other cues. They usually just tune into that one, but if I pair all of these other cues together, they start to capture all that in as well. A reward history, folders full of files. Those files have pictures in them, right? Pictures are also, you can think of them as concepts. Sit. Yes. He just learned that if I'm next to him, facing him, and I give this hand command in this verbal cue, if he puts his butt down, he gets a treat. He takes all that in as a snapshot. So from his mind's eye, this means sit. But to his mind's eye, this might not mean sit. To teach that this means sit and this means sit, we need to do what's called generalization. So generalization is applying one concept like this, sit, to different contexts, like this. Sit.
Sit. Sit. Good boy.
Sit.
Sit. Sit. Sit. Sit. Sit. Sit. Sit.
Sit.
I like to think of the generalization process as like a staircase. The bottom of the staircase is their foundation of understanding, usually taught through repetitive training. So for example, with teaching sit, I might do 10 sits in a row with the same exact picture, and then after they learn that exact picture, start to generalize. I start to go up that staircase, and each step, I only change one thing at a time. When we generalize, we don't want to skip steps. If I taught him sit like this, and then we go outside and I'm not standing in front of him with a treat, and I tell him sit, and he doesn't do it, he's not necessarily being disobedient. He might just not get the full picture. Most of the training process is generalization. Basically change one variable at a time. You add or remove one variable at a time. So while they're acquiring new skills, think of it from what picture do I want to teach them as the foundation that has as much help as possible? And then from their perspective, how do I fade out one of those cues at a time? And while you're fading out cues, and maybe even adding other ones like different environments, different people, keep in mind that that's moving up that staircase towards the top of the staircase is absolute mastery of a skill. While we're generalizing, while we're making it harder and harder for the dog, we want to remain at what's called the 80% success rate, meaning 8 out of 10 times the dog nails it. 4 out of 5 repetitions, the dog does it right away. And 1 out of 5 times, I might have to repeat myself and give more information. So for example, if I was teaching send to place, and 4 out of 5 times he did it right away, and 1 out of 5 times I had to go place, place, and then he nailed it, I'm right in the sweet spot where he's learning because I'm challenging him just a little bit, and I'm giving him guidance right away when he doesn't get it. So as he's getting better at things, he's succeeding 80% of the time the first time that you ask him to do something, because you're giving him enough information to succeed. Another way to think of this is don't give a command if you're not 80% certain that he's gonna do it. So if, say, he's off leash at a dog park, he's 50 feet away, and he's up next to the fence, and there's a dog on the other side of the fence that he's checking out, and I wanna get him away from that dog, before I say, hey, Cooper, get over here, I need to think through, if I say that, am I gonna give him one repetition in the reward history that says, blow off my owner's recall command because this is more interesting? If I'm doing commands and I'm not at an 80% success rate, I'm building a reward history for what we call selective obedience. As in, the dog has learned that sometimes I don't have to listen to you, and right now is one of those times that I'd rather not listen to you. Does that make sense? So to avoid building a bad reward history, a muddled reward history, don't give commands if you don't think he's 80% likely to do the thing. Instead, for now, if he's up at that fence and you need to get him back, maybe go all the way up to him, put a treat to his nose and go, Cooper, come, type of thing. And then I'm 80% certain he's gonna come if I put a treat in front of his face. I would way rather you do that than to have him learn to blow you off because you gave a command that he was not likely to do. He had a 5% chance of doing the command and I gave it anyway. That way I'm setting him up to learn to disobey. While you're climbing that staircase, we've talked about that 80% proficiency rate. That's a good way to determine if a dog's ready to go on to the next step. If they fail at a certain level of difficulty, a certain staircase, especially if they do it twice in a row, I want to take a step down that staircase and show them the last picture that they did understand. Instead of, if I was just to stay at the same level of difficulty, we talked about this earlier, of like, that'd be equivalent to a kid failing a test and then me just handing them the same test and be like, try again. But usually if they're acquiring a new skill and they're struggling a little bit, I want to back off and make it a little bit easier instead of holding this level of difficulty and then helping them out when they struggle, because then if I'm doing that, I'm really just teaching a dog to wait for more information instead of having them figure it out on their own. Lastly, fading. When I am teaching a dog something, I'm assisting them into doing it. And then as they get better, I assist them less and less. So for example, if I'm teaching send to place, at first I might be leading them all the way onto the place board. And then as they get better, I might stop a foot away from the place board. That's me fading my assistance. And then over another 100 reps, I'm 10 feet away from the place board. Another good example is when we teach down, we might lure all the way to the ground. Yes. And then as he gets better, I fade my assistance by stopping higher and higher and higher. So over time, you've helped him do something, and then you help him less and less as he understands what it is you're asking of him. Another example of fading is if a dog is relying on 2 cues for something. Say for example, this dog knows downward pressure, yes, and they kind of know the hand command down. To fade away from needing one of those cues, in this case the leash pressure, sit, I could do new cue, old cue, down, yes, good boy. So I have about a second gap between those 2 cues. Over time, he'll learn that the first cue predicts the more familiar cue. The new cue predicts the old cue that he understands. So, down, yes, good boy, down, good boy, sit, down, yes, good boy. So part of my assist that I need to fade away from using is leaning over a little bit. And then over time I could try to isolate the verbal cue, sit, by doing this, down, yes, with that new cue, old cue technique. Free, sit, Dolph, down, yes, good boy. Good job, buddy. Come on. Good girls. Good job, Goldies. Come on. Yeah.